back home into my apartment, I decided to look through the hunter's shop and online. Of course, I already knew that some of the weapons that I actually wanted to clear the other floors of the Demon's Castle would be pretty expensive, but it actually shocked me to even the prices were actually in the billions, which shocked me immensely. Of course, I was expecting it, but to see it with my own eyes was much more shocking. Of course, I knew I might have saved up in more than enough with the constant raids and, of course, the offering that jinwoo basically gave me. I thought it would be enough to at least buy a decent resistance home artifact, but it seems like these artifacts are much more expensive than I originally thought. Even with one of those cheapest being at least 200 million, and even those are basically nothing in comparison. Of course, I also glanced at my stats window as I realized that most of the things inside the system shop are basically kind of useless since they don't give me any resistance to fire. They just grant me other things, but not even resistance to fire nor anything that will basically able to make me not feel the flame itself. Though of course I do spot some beneficial things. But of course, with it not having any skills for me to gain, I just didn't bother with it. Because after I was able to clear the 69th floor, I was actually able to get the skill Mana Devour, which I did use against Milas as a Scorps to get an extra amount of mana. And that is very beneficial, as I think I will utilize it more as I continue to destroy monsters. With most weakest of monsters, after I defeat them, I'll most likely just devour them. Since I not want to make too much shadow soldiers, since I want strong soldiers and not weak ones. So I'll most likely devour the weaker ones. And if the strong ones cannot be robbed by my shadow ability, then I will just utilize my mana devour to devour the mana within their body. I also wondered if there is a possibility for me to also do that after I turn into shadow soldiers, since their physical body will still be there, which means that I'll also have a leftover mana. But I still decided to not bother with it much. Eventually, I also glanced at the Orb of Avarice, which is a very, very impressive artifact, basically able to double the magic capacity of the of those who hold it. And that is actually way more than most other magic artifacts which increase the magic capacity, with most going from 20 to 30% at best. So it was very beneficial, but also knowing that my license as an asteroid hunter is still not out yet would also most likely mean that anyone who basically sees me basically selling it at E rank hunter, basically selling our item which is around possibly the S rank level or maybe a national rank, will most likely suspect it very much. So I won't. So I knew that it would be very, very bad. And even if I sell in the black market, they'll still find me suspicious, and I'm also gonna have to kill them. And I kind of don't want to do that, even though I know that my personality will change over in the next events which will occur. I know that I must still keep my personality as a human being. I don't want to just kill human beings like it was nothing like paper, but I won't do you need to do that in the future. I know that very much since some humans will be pure scumbags, so I need to deal with it myself. But for now, I'll just have to be passive, at least for now. Of course, I was able to scroll through the internet and still pondering on what should I do. Since most of the items I could not even afford nor anything else, and any high ranking dungeons I cannot enter due to me still not having my S rank license, so it was a very difficult decision for me. Until I spotted something interesting. An A rank gate, with of course one the association's guild, being Hunter's Guild, actually having an offer for the mining team. With me, of course, smiling at the idea, as they were actually looking for a low rank hunter in the mining squad, which of course piqued my interest, and eventually I signed up to it. While on the other side, of course, Mr. Gunhee and Jincho would have been talking calmly with each other, eventually explaining that I'm pretty impressive young hunter. Of course, Jincho also would have given the information to Mr. Gunhee about me joining the Hunters Guild. Of course, their expedition in the A rank gate. Of course, Doing him thinks that I most likely have joined the strike squad, but Jojo instantly disapproves of the idea of the chairman and tells him that I'm actually joining the mining team instead of the strike squad, shocking the chairman instantaneously. With him even pondering of what is my plan of doing that, since I'm already strong enough in being an S rank in comparison. So it was pretty confusing of why I do that. Well, back and the airing gate, which occurred in the morning, the boss of the mining team would have asked me if I'm truly an E-rank hunter, with me of course calmly nodding as I say that yes, I am. Of course, he asked me what class I am, with me of course say that I'm a fighter, and tells me if I have any experience with the field of the work. I told him that I kinda do, but not at the same time, since it's kind of a new thing for me, since I've not done mining like that. But I do have seen it, so I actually have a bit of experience, but not fully, so it's kind of 50-50 for me. But he tells me that it's at least still good to hear that, since at least I have slight experience, unlike those who didn't have many experience. So it was actually much more good since I had to start from scratch from learning everything, but very beneficial nonetheless. Of course, I would just glance at the striking squads and also be very impressed since the strikers were actually split into different teams, and of course, I already knew the split in different teams or actually teams of the mining squad, strike squad, and of course the carcass squad. With the carcass squad basically trying to contain the dead bodies of the mana beast. And of course, the mining squad basically collecting the mana, essence, stones, and of course anything else. As for Strike Squad, they basically deal with the dungeon itself. Though, of course, they do not defeat the boss instantaneously, because they need to keep the dungeon open for the rest of the teams to do their own job. Eventually, I'll pick up one with the pickaxe and realize that there's actually mana infused inside of it, with me actually being calmly surprised. Is this actually the first time I've seen this before? I initially thought that this would just be a normal pickaxe with maybe some slightly higher quality material, but it's just infused with mana, which surprised me, since even if I were to actually utilize it as an E-rank hunter back in the day, it would most likely would able to take down at least a D to possibly even high D rank monsters with ease. Of course, this is just in the past, but it was actually pretty cool to actually see this with my own eyes in the field as well. Though I can tell that I can actually slightly infuse my own mana with it, but it will most likely not bring too much difference to it. But it could be useful in the future. And since I already have this information back inside my head, since I kind of forgot about it, I can actually infuse mana with some of my weapons, I decided to keep that in mind for the future weapons I will acquire. I'll say maybe even do that with some of my other soldiers. Maybe. Maybe in the future. But for now, this was an idea that I decided to keep in the back of my head. I also glanced at the A-rank gate, which is actually the first time in ever that I've seen an A-rank gate up close. I've only heard like rumors about it, even seen pictures of it, but seeing it in person was shocking to me, since this gate was way larger than I expected. So much larger that I would say it is almost the size of a building, only by itself. But the mana flow within it, it feels like it's entirely its own dimension, just like the Demon's Castle, though much weaker in comparison. I can already tell. If Serbia were actually go inside that gate, I think that it would most likely would be able to destroy it with ease, since it basically came from an S ranking the gate itself. So I can already tell that Serbia would have no problem clearing this area and gate by itself. Though for me, it was still very shocking to see an area gate up close. But I'm actually glad that I came here, since now this actually make it much more interesting for me, but also to gain much more experience about the A rank gates that I'm most likely rated in the future after getting my S rank license, which will actually give me good experience and knowing what to expect in an A rank dungeons. Of course, I know that every A rank dungeons will be different, but having experience in at least one will be more than enough for me. So I'll be always on guard and prepared. While inside the A rank dungeon, the hunters will be prepared. Well, of course, Choi Song-in, being of course the strike squad's leader, decided to handle things himself, saying that he'll handle all the beasts while the rest make sure to stay in their places and make sure that nobody gets hurt. And then he then spots the giant monsters. Of course, he remains calm and composed, showing not even a slight flinch in just looking at the gigantic monsters. Their size being incredible, almost in the size of around 10 to around 20 meters in height. But of course, Choi Song just remains calm and composed, and eventually lights his cigarette in complete flames, and says that it's time for him to brighten up the surroundings. And instantly, he fires an immensely powerful fire magic out of his hand, instantly from launching it at the monsters, which shock them of the overwhelming immense magical flame. And instantly, they get evaporated with just a single strike of Chosong's flames, instantly annihilating them and burning some to a crisp, while others would get annihilated completely by the flames due to being too close to the flame itself. While others were able to survive, they were critically injured, while others are completely dead. Of course, Choi Song instantly tells the tanks to get ready to block the incoming flames, since he actually was able to cast flames, which can basically detect every other monster inside the dungeon and make sure to take it out so they don't have to deal with too much hassle on the way. As he tells that his firestorm is on its way. Of course, the tanks instantly get into their own position, slamming their shields into the ground, cracking it slightly as they activate their magical barrier. Instantly able to defend the rest of the strike squad, as instantly the flame hits the barrier, with of course the mage is making sure that the barrier is stable and infused with more than enough mana to withstand the blast. With of course Choi Song of course remaining calm and composed, with him explaining that it seems like the monsters are getting really cooked in his own terms, as he thinks that it is actually much more easier than he expected. Not like the rest of the A rank gates that he is basically used to. This actually seems much more easier than many other before. Though he says that it will most likely be much more better. He was just to an mysterious figure that he'll basically escort her since there'll be a lot of ashes in the way, and he knows that she is very sensitive to the smell. Of course, the tanks are actually quite surprised that he's acting so nonchalant about everything, and the fact that he's incredibly composed is very amazing to them. And even his power is something to not be scoffed at, as they think that this is truly what an answer encounter should be. And they believe that no matter if they were an A rank tanks, they will most likely not be able to even beat him, since his magic power is overwhelmingly strong. Even though he only has a strength to equal around an A rank hunter, his magical power as an S rank is far above anything they ever think. Of course, Joseon tells everyone that he will escort them back to safety and also make sure that nobody gets hurt on the way. While outside the gate, of course they'll be having a side conversation. When of course one of Joseon's men is basically talking about to the mining team's boss, with him explaining that they were just making sure that everything is for the safety of its team. Of course, the mining team boss just tells him to then that he understands and tells him to stop saying the same thing 3 times already, since it's been a really long time and he doesn't want to get annoyed so quickly since he has a lot of work to do inside the gate. Of course, the suitman tells them that they'll make sure that the strike squad will come out just any moment, with of course the boss man just sighing. Of course, he does explain a lot even more about how Choi Song is basically trying to make sure that everything is safe for the mining squad and the carcass squad. But of course, the boss of the mining squad tells him to calm down and to get off his back, with me just glancing at the two of them from the back, with me thinking that this guy is really persistent, huh? Well, at least the mining boss is a normal guy, which is very composed most of the time. I kind of respect it, kind of. Eventually, everyone who knows that the strike squad is finally coming out, with everyone saying, well, of course, the mining team telling everyone to get their equipment ready so that they can head inside soon. Of course, I'll calmly just glance at them and say anything to myself that they're finally done. And actually, much more faster than I expected. It must have been a really easy battle, even though it was an A rank gate, since I know most S rank hunters can mostly clear out A rank gates in around 10 to around 30 minutes and possibly an hour at max. But they were able to clear it out in around 10 to 15 minutes, which is very impressive and faster than I expected. Of course, I also glanced at the strike squad itself, with me knowing that this is currently one of the strongest strike squad that I've ever seen, composed of multiple A rank hunters and of course two S rank hunters, one of them being Choi Jong-in, the current leader of the Hunters Guild, and of course, I won't just drop my head to make sure that I don't get his attention, as I didn't want him to notice me too quickly. And of course, I'll also glance at the next S rank hunter, being Cha Hien, the Vice Guild Master, and currently one of the strongest S rank hunters of this world, besides myself. I know that her current strength is very impressive. Even at first glance, I can already tell that she's incredibly strong. If she were to ever be actually a vessel of the of rulers, she most likely be the strongest, even more stronger than even Thomas Andrew or the other national rank hunters. Even the chairman Gogan, he will most likely not be able to match her if she indeed possesses the power of the rulers herself. Though I can tell that with her current strength, she is most likely a really high rank S rank herself. I think that at most, if she were to give it her all, she most likely can take out two S rank hunters with almost the same level as herself. With me being very impressed. As I can tell that she's very strong, almost a similar level of the chairman himself, but I deep down know that this is complete false, since the chairman is basically a ruler's vessel. So he has way more superior combat skills and, of course, experience than herself. Though she is not to be scoffed at, she is stronger than even most S rank hunters, as I know that myself. She is very impressive, even a prodigy herself, even more than myself. If I haven't actually acquired the system, she most likely would have been able to achieve a national rank hunter title in the future, maybe, if she continued to train and improve her skills. I can tell, just by glancing at her, but I also have a calm smile within my mind, as I can tell why June decided to pick her as his wife. Though for now, I'll just blush aside, thinking that maybe I shouldn't think that very well. At least for now. Of course, Charm wouldn't, of course, glance to the side, trying to look around for me, but I'll quickly able to hide my mana. Of course, she'll be confused as she felt a strong presence around here. With me, of course, knowing that she has really sharp senses, more than I expected. And I'm glad that I was able to basically suppress my mana just in the nick of time, since I know that my mana is actually much larger than I expected. Though suppressing it actually became much more easier thanks to the system itself. Since the system does hide basically around 58% of my mana, while I can basically hide the rest of it with my own experience. Well, the Mighty King's boss decided to basically tell everyone to get ready so they can crack inside of it. Silent the Aaron gate with everyone nodding and getting ready, with me of course already ready. Well, inside the dungeon, eventually we went inside, with me just glancing inside of it, saying that it's incredible then I can actually see the wind itself. But of course, I can tell this is not wind, but the mana waves. The mana waves that are made by the boss himself. I already knew who the boss of this gate was. Though, I can already tell that the boss inside this gate is actually much more weaker. Weaker than the boss I'll most likely face at another entering gate sooner or later. Of course, I also hear some of the conversation of the other miners about mocking me about being an A-rank hunter, with me just saying to myself that A-rank hunters are very not welcome around here, huh? Well, I'm not here for long anyway, so I'll have to borrow with them. I honestly would have beat them up if I was given the chance to, but this would be just basically being a bully, and I'm not that kind of person. I'm also this kind of person if someone pisses me off or if they're evil. Basically, anything else that just bothers me, or anything else. Of course, one of the miners decides to basically try and get cocky and tells me to move out of the way, but instantly I'll just glance at him with a slight glare, as I was clearly not in the mood of dealing with arrogant bastards. Not even someone who's currently even weaker than when I was back as an A-rank hunter, nonetheless. Of course, the miner is instantly startled as I decide to walk to the other miners to get ready. Of course, he is startled and asks if I'm really an E-rank hunter. As you can tell by the presence that I just made with my glare, I'm most likely close to an E rank to possibly even an S rank, since he has felt the glare of an S rank before. Of course, and I also would have also explained most of the things in my silent mind about the holding team members, which basically make sure that to collect the corpses of the monsters inside a dungeon, with most of them actually being incredibly valuable, with basically something like teeth, skin, or anything like that. But I also glanced aside and actually realized that even the beast itself, as its own corpse, is actually incredibly valuable and worth a lot of money. With me basically deciding to keep that in mind to spare at least some monsters so I can basically sell them, which would be very beneficial if I'm to go up close into other area gates in the future. So I decided to keep that in my mind to know that I can sell it at any time I want. Of course, the boss of the mighty team would eventually ask me if this is my first time being inside Aaron Gate. With me, of course, saying yes, and it is bigger, much bigger than I expected, almost like the beast itself. Of course, he told me that it's normal since the Aaron Gates basically have a lot of much more higher amount of capacity, which basically makes the the magic beast inside of it much more stronger and more powerful. I want to say some of them do increase their size as well, which is not that surprising. Of course, I also asked what happens if the Shark Squad basically takes out the magic beast like the boss itself if it's still not alive. But of course, the boss explained that if that was to actually happen, most likely everyone inside the gate itself will most likely die. We've actually been commonly surprised that see that he's basically being very serious. Though I can't already tell this was basically a serious matter that I asked. But I decided to continue on with my own job. Of course, everyone will be surprised, even the boss itself, as his coworker asked him if this is actually my first day on the job, with of course the boss confirming it. As of course they'll glance at me as I was easily able to mine the essence stones with ease. Due to my physical enhancement strength alongside all the stats that I've set into both my intelligence, which is basically almost not just increasing my mana pool, but also my stamina, basically makes me into basically a drilling machine for essence stones. With me getting able to basically mine out at least possibly around 100 tons of essence stones, more than enough for everyone. Of course, by the time I'm finished, it's lunchtime and everyone is getting ready to eat. Of course, the boss asked me if I'm coming, but I told him that I'm good and I've actually ate before coming here. With them, of course, I decided to leave me by myself, seeing that that's how I want to. Eventually, I decided to drop my pickaxe as everyone left and instantly disappear, instantly rushing inside the dungeon all the way up to a boss's lair, since I already know that I have around an hour of free time. And I decided to basically go and have a quick look at the boss inside the lair. As I glance at the boss, I realize there's actually a stone golem, a very strong stone golem, possibly around an A rank level. I can tell that this boss golem is incredibly strong. It was actually much more weaker, it must likely be B rank, but it is currently is actually A rank, which impressed me. I was also thinking about maybe even killing it since it's actually even stronger than Mila's, and I can tell. Though, of course, its physical strength and mana, which is a mini, is actually slightly stronger than Mila's, as not the same level as Mila's. As Mila's could actually summon beasts, while this monster is just focused on pure physical strength and durability, while Mila's was basically a magical caster, which makes a difference. Though I was still very impressed, it also had the eager expression of possibly killing it and adding it to my army of shadows. But I know that I cannot do that, since it will most likely cause life of innocent people. So I decided to reluctantly grip my fist, so I decided to not summon my weapon. Of course, I instantly also get startled as I heard a voice of Cheyenne. It still startled me, and as I was actually lost focus of trying to sense for everyone beside me, and even not activating the camouflage skill, as I realized that this was basically a dumb decision of mine to activate the skill itself. Of course, I would tell her, I would decide to lie to her and tell her that I got lost and ended up here. Of course, she was confused how I got lost here, but she actually told me if I'm from the mighty team and told me to get away from here, saying that this is where the boss lives. Of course, I won't think to myself that she is very impressive, but I still cannot even believe that she was able to actually sneak up behind me, since I was still on guard by the time, even though I was slightly cocky myself. Though she is very impressive, and I actually admit that she's one of the S rank hunters that I admire the most. And even she's very humble, as I know that myself. Of course, she decides to slightly lecture me, with me, of course, apologizing, saying that I should not have done that. Eventually, I decided to walk away, but easily she fails the set of my mana due to it being so pure thanks to the system itself, and of course for other reasons as well. With her sincere and cheesy tells me to wait, with me of course asking if something is wrong. Of course, she decides to sniff me, with me actually being slightly surprised, but deciding to tease her slightly, I tell her if she's gonna do that, maybe she should just take me out on dinner first before, without asking me. Of course, she easily blushes in embarrassment and profusely apologizes. She's able to eventually regain her composure and tells me to be careful on my way back, saying that the is pretty big. But of course, me just like sweating, realizing that she really is hard to come by, but she's kind of cute. I gotta admit that. That blushing special kind of made me think of her as really cute. And I then told her that sure thing, as I said to leave. Of course, after the raid was completed, I eventually got some of the money that I was able to receive thanks to my so much essence stones, with me of course thinking the mining boss. Of course, he then of course asked me if I wanted to be hired by him in the mining team. With of course me just smiling nervously and telling that I didn't appreciate the offer, but I told him that I'm kind of busy working on something else. Of course, the boss kind of bummed out, but tells me that to do what I want. Of course, I also would have I start to realize that the next raid will also begin tomorrow, and I decided to basically go inside the next raid tomorrow and be with the mining team. With of course the mining team actually being surprised I actually want to go tomorrow as well. With me of course saying that I can actually make up at least slightly free time for it since I don't have that much. But of course the mining team decided to agree with it, and even the mining boss as well. I also would have heard the news about the Strike Squad B actually going instead of the Strike Squad A, would me actually being surprised and realize that basically will most likely mean that at lowest they'll be around B rank hunters and at the highest will be A rank hunters. With me realizing that I must be there to help them, since currently they'll most likely not be able to handle an A rank game by themselves. So I must help them to the best of my abilities. While on the other side of the restaurant, a couple of hours later, we see Jinho as he's actually talking to someone about me, and of course, this was not other than his cousin, Yu So Yoon, Jinho's cousin. Of course, she would ask him why he called her here, with him and basically talking with her about me, basically not picking up his calls and everything about that. Of course, she would be confused on who was I. Of course, she'll be very confused, and she attached Jinho's phone to try and call me, but as she actually started to call me, I eventually would have picked up. But of course, she would actually be surprised, and she would hand the phone. Of course, Jinho would tell me that it's been a really long time, and I would tell Jinho that I'll be kind of busy tomorrow. So I tell him that next day after the raid that I'll have inside the next A-rank dungeon, I'll tell him that I'll be coming with him. With of course, Jinho being very grateful. On the other side of the city, we'll see an apartment, as inside of it will be tracking his apartment. With her, of course, asking for something interesting. Being, of course, my info on the one of the miners, being, of course, me. She will, of course, ask for my name, and of course, she will tell her that they're kind of busy since the Hunter Association kind of covered up my name. Of course, she gets bummed out, but she doesn't indeed thanks the informationers for at least their help. She then decides to flop on the bed, and eventually she just thinks to herself that I'm actually the first one to actually smell very nice. Of course, she easily blushes and buries her head into a pillow to just think about this from someone she has just met and even smelled, and she says it's very embarrassing since she didn't even apologize for this. She just mumbled some words and she told for me to just return back to my team without even properly apologizing, which made her very embarrassed. Eventually, on the next morning, I had been with the mine squad on another A-rank gate, with me actually noticing that this A-rank gate is actually slightly larger than the previous one. Wouldn't be surprised, but I remained calm, knowing what is about to happen, but also knew that I must intervene, way more than I can even think about it. As I know that during the original timeline intervene, it was not enough. I must intervene way quickly and way faster. Of course, the team of the B Strike Squad will be Son Kin Hoon, an A-rank hunter from the Hunters Guild, with him of course asking if someone will basically help them carry their supplies. inside the dungeon. Of course, most of the miners are kind of reluctant to even take upon this job since they're around D to A ranks inside of it, so they're kind of reluctant. Until I decided to raise my hand, shocking everyone, of course, asking me what I was even thinking. But I told them that I can basically handle it, saying that it would be no problem. Of course, I already knew that inside the Aaron Gate we have a lot of difficult challenges, and I already knew myself that they will not be able to even defeat the boss himself. And I think to myself that I must defeat it myself. I must help them end this raid, even if it will cause the Strike Squad's fall on Hunter's Guild's famous reputation. I know that reputation is something that can be restored in a couple of just a couple of raids. An area raid like this is much more important to keep people safe more than anything else, more than reputation, more than anything else. And I still have my own morality as a human to protect innocent lives, even those of hunters. Of course, I will introduce myself to Kihun, with him, of course, being grateful for this. Grateful for me basically accepting the job, with me telling this no problem. Eventually, as we went inside, he would then ask me if the bag is really hard for me, but I can tell that I can manage is not that difficult. With him, I should be surprised that I'm not even struggling at all. Of course, I was just glancing the other strike squads, with me, of course, knowing the mage spellcaster Gina. With of course, I actually read some articles about her being an A rank mage, and her magic is actually pretty impressive. Even surpassing normal A rank mages, so she can be considered a high A rank mage, which is very impressive. Even I can tell that she is very impressive herself, but her choice of clothes is kind of revealing to say the least. As I'll just kindly blush, but I honestly shaking my head, able to remain regain my composure. And of course, the Strike Squad would have gone ready, with of course all mages, healers, and of course tanks and fighters ready to prepare to get inside the dungeon. When of course me and the bag also getting prepared as well, knowing what is about to come, and of course the raid being more than unexpected, not just for the Strike Squad but also possibly maybe for myself as well. Of course, as we enter inside the gate, I would think to myself that this gate is actually slightly smaller than the other one, since the other one was basically around possibly 100 times bigger. Though this is not that small as our possibly D or even C rank gates, though it was still pretty large on its own, even though smaller to a previous one. I also remembered about Joan He, one of my, let's just say, future wives, and I was thinking about the Strike Squad itself. Well, of course, me also noticing some A rank healers, and I think to myself that if Juhi was actually part of the Strike Squad, she must have much more better experience as a hunter than anything else. She was actually was recruited to basically help me with some of my injuries. Though I think to myself that maybe this was basically a leap of faith. Though I decided not to bother with it much, knowing that the past is a past, at least for now. Well, of course, the Shark Squad gets instantly ambushed by multiple jackal like monsters. Of course, everyone's quite surprised, but they're easily able to handle these beasts with ease, with everyone able to counter them and easily kill them. Of course, multiple cards, of course, rush at them, seemingly shocking the rest of the hunters as they realize that there's actually a whole pack of them. But of course, Gina is able to utilize one of her gravitational magics and easily launch multiple projectiles and the beasts, easily killing most of them, even breaking some of their jaws, snapping them in half. Eventually, of course, I also glance at the corpses. I realize that they actually have leashes, and realize that someone has actually tamed them and has been utilized them as bait. Of course, everyone is also surprised actually hearing this announcement of mine. With me explaining that I've seen other beasts able to tame much more weaker beasts, which is kind of normal, but to see this in a high rank gate was still pretty surprising to me as well, as I've only seen it in possibly C rank gates at most, but to see it at an A rank gate was quite surprising for me, and it's actually much more advanced than any other as well. With most of them mostly leading to teamwork, but this is basically slavery in even basically acknowledgement as owners, so it was much more different. Of course, I also glanced outside and I know that the real challenge was actually coming. The big guys. The high orcs. I already knew that the high orcs are pretty impressive and strong, Much more different than normal orcs, the high orcs are much more impressive and more powerful, and more intimidating as well. Of course, I won't be surprised as the high orcs will instantly launch at them, as he pounds on the hunters, easily starting to overwhelm them with their numbers and strength. Of course, the mages were able to cast multiple flames, with one of them casting one of the flames at the orc, but the orc basically brushes off the attack, sealing it as weak as he rushes at the mages. Of course, Jenna tries to basically slow him down, realizing her binding spell, but she can only slow it down for at least 5 seconds, since her mana is basically running low. Of course, even with the summons of one of the mages, it's not enough. But of course, the other mages try to basically slow it down more, but it's not enough. Of course, I had to utilize my camouflage skill and instantly disappear from view, and instantly kill the orc which is about to kill the healer, which shocks her as she sees the high orc's spine ripped away from his body, basically being cut in half, shocking her as she is terrified by a sight just by seeing it, as she basically saw nothing but doing it to the orc. But it was actually me, while utilizing camouflage. Of course, also camouflage now is basically decided to damage most of the higher orcs, basically weakening them for the other hunters. Of course, killed some which were able to spot me while I was camouflage, with me basically acting completely calm and collective, as you know I must not lose my composure. And of course, I can basically keep camouflage on as long as I want, because the mana capacity for it would not be that difficult, since my mana is very high in comparison. Of course, some of the others were able to spot me, but I can just remain calm and easily take down most of them. With me, of course, knowing that as I have the party, I also level up due to them basically helping me in my own way. Of course, I also glance at the notification of level up, though I can already tell that it will be very big of a drag, since if I were to basically kill those orcs by myself, I almost could have able to level up at least 3 times, but no matter. At least it's beneficial that way, at least for now. Of course, as the Strike Squad is able to take down the rest of the higher orcs, I can let the outsider leave as I return, as I deactivate my camouflage, and of course drink one mana potion behind the backs of everyone so I can recover my mana, since I didn't want to waste my mana too quickly before I fought the boss himself. Of course, one of the female mages is able to tell that I'm basically a caster of the camouflage skill, since she was able to sense it. We're actually being surprised that I was actually able to basically camouflage myself so well, with not even someone around the A rank level was able to sense me. But she can tell because of being around B rank mage, so she can tell that I was camouflage. Even my skill was very impressive, even though I was supposed to be an A rank hunter myself. Of course, everyone will be pretty confused, and of course, one of the heroes will also explain to Ki-hun about what happened to one of the orcs in front of her, but of course, surprising him to actually see, even hear as well. Of course, he will of course ask Gina if she did that, but she decided to deny it, saying that even though that most of her specialties are not gravitational magic, nor levitation or telekinesis. Her magic is basically based on only flame type magic and possibly side telekinesis, but the telekinesis which was used was way far above her level. But her telekinesis usage is basically very intoxicating to her, and she can mostly use her flame abilities much more easier in comparison to other mages with flame type abilities. So she denies the fact that it was her. Of course, we decided to leave since the dungeon was pretty dangerous, and the high orcs were just the beginning, so we decided to not risk anything, with of course Kihon not wanting to lose a squad, nor risk any casualties. But as we glanced at the way to the gate, it was actually closed. Well, of course, the mage decided to basically and try and open it, but instantly they were actually hit by curses. All of them coughed up blood and instantly were paralyzed, as all of them fell to the ground, as he could not do anything. Of course, the healers quickly goes to them and decides to shield them quickly so they cannot die. And eventually gets aside and see multiple high orcs, with of course all of them surrounding us, with me remaining calm, but they're also slightly nervous, as you know I could have at least taken them out before they showed up, but I was too foolish. I think to myself that this was very arrogant of me to even think that maybe we could have actually not even be trapped here, but I guess it was just my luck. Of course, the leader of the High Orcs has to take control of one of his subordinates and tells him, of course, us to meet him. Of course, Kikon not having any other choice has to agree to a proposal of the High Orcs leader, as nobody else also has another choice. Since the mages are severely injured, all side of the tanks being almost exhausted out of energy, so they cannot do anything. Of course, I would just remain calm, but I also knew that he mostly tried to negotiate with the boss. But I already knew that is very pointless, since the boss will not let us live. He just uses entertainment. I know that myself. Of course, Kyon eventually told me to be careful, and of course, if I ever get a chance to leave, to do it as quickly as I can, with me being surprised at his sincerity for me, but I know it calmly. Well, outside the gate, Giant would eventually decide to glance at it, as she would be able to sense the mile waves coming from it. Of course, she'd be very surprised to actually see another errant gate actually opening tomorrow, in this morning, with her being surprised. Of course, she was also able to sense the storms in the mile flow, and eventually decided to go in there. But of course, due to her not having a weapon, the boss of the mighty team decided to give her a pickaxe. Of course, she thinks that it's enough for her, but eventually decides to take it and thanks him until that she'll be on her way. But of course, the mining boss team tell her good luck, with her being slightly embarrassed as he just smiles at her, saying that even though she is an Estering hunter, she does sometimes act like a child, but it's normal. As he smiles watching her go inside the gate. While back inside the Iron Gate, we'll be in the entrance of the High Orcs leader's lair. As we see tons and tons of High Orcs. Wouldn't be surprised their numbers is possibly around thousands. With me being very impressed. Though I remain calm as I then glance at the High Orcs leader, Kargalgan, the current leader and of course shaman of the High Orcs, and High Orc himself as well. Of course, all of us will be surrounded, with me just looking around, making sure that no High Orc is getting too close. But of course, I tend to intervene and eventually kill some of the High Orcs, and eventually tell Kihon that I want to handle the entire gate by myself, and I want his full permission as the current strike squad's leader, since I cannot intervene currently, and I want his permission. Of course, he was actually surprised, but seeing as I can easily take down most of the High Orcs, he has to agree to it reluctantly, knowing that he has no other choice. Since if he does refuse, the High Orcs will most likely take down everyone besides possibly me, and if he doesn't actually agree to it, I'm most likely able to basically help the Strike Squad survive. So he has to agree to it. Of course, I also wouldn't try to show him of what I meant, as I'll lift up one of the High Orcs and see slam up and down, easy crushing him with ease, shocking the Strike Squad with ease. With of course me eventually asking one last time if I have his permission to take down all the beasts inside the gate. Of course, Kihun nods and tells me that he has to have his full permission. I smile to myself. And eventually I also glance at Gargalgan, with him of course smiling at me, saying that I'm a funny guy to think that if he can take down everyone here by myself. But I would just smile at him, and I told him that maybe he is forgetting. But I'm not alone, as I summon all of my shadow soldiers, alongside Serbi and of course Baruka, with all of them getting ready. While outside the gate, Jincho and one of his associates was heading to basically make sure that the gate is actually stable. But eventually, if Jincho actually feels the mana waves from the gate itself, he's shocked and eventually decides to check it out. And eventually realizes that this Aaron gate is actually way higher, a high rank Aaron gate, which only S rank hunters can actually clear. And Aaron hunters cannot actually do anything against it, since they'll most likely die inside of it. With them eventually warning everyone attempts to not enter inside of it by any means necessary, and make sure to evacuate everyone who is inside of it, and make sure to help as well to get them out as quickly as possible. While back inside the dungeon, of course, China was able to sense the difference, the amount of waves coming within and the High Orc's lair, with her being surprised, realizing that the intensity is increased. Eventually, she realizes that the amount of waves are getting strong and they're actually coming from the boss. Of course, she knows that the only Jihoon's team is possibly the only survivors inside of there. So she decides to take all her cap away, and eventually decides to unleash some of her mana and infuse her with her pickaxe. So she decides to enter inside of it, while making sure to deal with the other high orcs which are standing in her way, making sure to be on guard for worst comes to worst. While back inside Kargolin's lair, all the high orcs will be prepared to fight me. When of course when then thinking that if I can basically take him down with just my puny soldiers, but of course that he's looking down on my shadow soldiers, and I tell him to not do that since they're stronger than he thinks, and I eventually activate Monarch's domain. I've already guessed that I'm basically able to achieve it after reaching the 70th floor of the Demon's Castle thanks to being a unique skill to my job class. And eventually, all my shadows will begin to glow purplish, with, of course, Mars Domain basically increasing their stats by 50%, making them 50% stronger than previously, as all of them will glow purple. Alongside Baruka, who glow purple alongside his daggers, with Cerberus having now a purplish hint to his bluish flames, as his flames were now more darker blue, as the three hairs roared, as in starting to rip through multiple of high orcs. Of course, everyone was surprised to actually see how strong my summons were, and even more surprised to actually see that I can summon more than just two beasts. Of course, I always had to utilize one of his skills, being Shout of Provocation, but the orcs were basically too high, even for his skill, and his skill level was basically too low to affect them. Of course, this gets Iron irritated, he has to basically handle them by himself, easily dispatching 3 high orcs with just one swing of his axe, thanks to Mars Domain boosting his strength and capabilities by the 50% boost. Of course, Igor also is able to handle the high orcs by himself, easily dispatching multiple with ease, splitting their bodies with just a swing of a sword, showing no difficulty in doing so. Of course, I'll also not be left out as I'll easily able to kill the other high orcs, getting more and more experience as I continue to kill more and more of them. Of course, I also tell the Goblin that he also underestimates my capabilities, as I'll then say arise, as I'm able to revive multiple Shadow Orcs, with me basically reviving all the Shadow Orcs that both me and my Shadow Soldiers killed. When of course Goblin and his men being shocked, as some of the High Orcs begins to fear, with the Goblin being in complete stunned silence, as he could not believe it, with me just smiling and telling that he'll join his dead comrades soon enough. Of course, the Goblin is instantly frightened by my lair alone, as he cannot believe that I'm just strong, as he cannot believe it. But eventually he tells his High Orcs army to attack mine. But of course, mine is easily able to handle it, and with of course my mom being immensely large, my soldiers are actually able to basically keep up with the battle, though most of my low-ranked soldiers are basically getting killed with ease, while my other high-ranking ones are easily able to dispatch most of them, so it's a very stalemate battle, though my shadow soldiers have the advantage with strength due to Serbi and of course Tank and the rest basically able to handle them. I of course tell him that finally my generals will also join the battle. With of course Iron swinging of one of the High Orcs leaders, besides Galgan, and Easy is able to dispatch him. Of course, Igor is also able to handle 2 by himself, as he is able to stab one with his daggers and eventually deflect the other one to the side, swinging him to Iron as Iron is easily able to smack him to the side. And eventually Tank is able to finish the job with the slam to the ground. With of course Iron giving a thumbs up to Tank, with Tank just waving his paw, seemingly implying that it was no problem. It should not bother him. Of course, Kaganes has to utilize some of his cursed spells, but it's no use. He tries to launch it at me, but I already know that it was no use. They will not affect me in the slightest. As I expected, the buff of my immunity was too strong, and of course, the curses were now dispelled, with me just smiling slightly. And to him, as I told him before, that him and I are a terrible matchup. And so in that he very much underestimated me, and now he is paying the price for it. Of course, Kargan is shocked as multiple of his men begins to fall and more turn shadows. But of course, by the side, Dragon is also shocked and even surprised to actually see of what is even happening, as she never expected anything like this. And she could not even believe it, as there's many summoned beasts, and she could not even believe that a hunter can actually exude so much mana, even control all of those, with her being incredibly impressed. Even asking herself what is exactly going on, but eventually she's able to reclaim her composure and asking the Strike Squad if they're okay. With of course the healer saying that they're alright. With of course Kihon basically suffering slight injuries, but he's fine at least for the moment. While back in the fight, Kurgan was able to utilize multiple of his spells to basically enlarge and increase his power. Don't just glance at him, and I think to myself, as I say, not this again. I have very bad experience with giants before, and I don't want to repeat that. As I instantly rush at Kurgan and easily stab me in the eye. Of course, he shouts in pain, but I just tell him that by increasing his size, he just became an easier target. I tell him that a mage without his guards cannot actually block an as a surprise attack from an assassin. With me, of course, instantly punching him to the side, slamming him to the ground, and knocking some sense into him. Of course, the gun then falls to the ground. Well, of course, when Jinwoo actually arrives, he sees that I'm easy to take down the boss, with him being impressed alongside Chahayan as well. I tell him that the moment he lost his guards, he also lost the battle, and this was basically my victory. As of course the Shadow Orcs beside me appear, with all of them ready to follow my command. Of course, Alan tries to scream for me, saying that he'll kill me, but before he can finish, the orcs instantly kill him, slashing his body and basically killing him. I eventually get a notification that I defeated the indigenous boss and level up 2 times. I smile to myself and think that good, very good. And eventually, as I do not pick up any of the items, and I do just leave them for the Strike Squad, since I believe that they deserve it. I eventually decided to destroy the shadow itself. That's all I want, alongside the mana itself from the body as well. I eventually say arise, and eventually I move to, of course, summon my new shadow, as I'd seen that name him Tusk, as his rank was Elite Knight, though he was still level 1. Though I'm not surprised, as also Baruko was in the same level, and I can tell that he was very strong. Even though he was a mage, he was very impressive and even strong and powerful as well. I decided to also give him the Orb of Avarice, as Tusk, of course, accepts it and bows to me. I eventually also glance at the body itself, and eventually utilize my skill Mod Devour. It instantly devours Tusk's Superior's body, instantly devouring it, and eventually I get a notification saying that I've gained 6,000 mana. With me actually being surprised. Wow, that's actually way more than I expected. This is basically from an A rank boss. It mentioned it was actually an S rank boss. Wow, just by thinking about it, I can't even imagine. My mana pool will be large, more enough to sustain more shadows as well. You know, me smiling to myself. But of course, I'm also going to inside and see Juncho, with of course him asking about me. Of course, I just remain calm and not even surprised to actually see him here, as I already expected he'll come. I'm also glad that his Strike Squad was saved. Of course, he has to also escort me when his associates, with me of course nodding and eventually decided to follow them. Of course, on the other side, Chang would of course be surprised that I should be escorted by one of the association's vice masters. Of course, she'll be surprised, but also decided to also stay calm and collective, knowing that maybe in the future she would decide to talk with me, since maybe this was not the right time. And guys, this is the end for this part. Hope you guys enjoy this, and I will see you guys next one. Sayonara.